Happy New Year and welcome back to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to be back. New Year, fresh start. So many exciting things are happening. In Denmark, we actually started administering the vaccine on December 27th. So, while this year may still be crazy, change is coming. And with these new opportunities, what are you going to make out of this year? I brought a couple of stories with me today that highlight some of the recommendations, some of the trends, and how you can be a better version of yourself in the coming year. The first thing we're going to look at is crypto. So I've personally been a huge fan of crypto for like 3 or 4 years. I personally trade via my Coinbase app. And for a while, I was taking a bit of a loss. But things are changing. I logged in the other day and I actually made more than 4 times my money back on my initial investment.
Wow.
Yeah, so new start, new money in my wallet. I'm keeping it in there. So we've seen, especially Bitcoin hit an all-time high at $34,000. It's gone down slightly since, but for all those who thought crypto's a bubble, it's not going to work out. All these, people, they first made some money, now they're losing money. If I were you, I'd keep my crypto. So I have Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ether. But some people today you can diversify a lot more. It's not like when I started, it was really hard to find places to buy crypto. It was very limited what you could buy. But you can get in trouble if you buy the wrong thing or if you sell the wrong thing. So our first story with us today is from CoinGeek, and it's about the class action suit that was just filed against Coinbase. So for those of you who don't know Coinbase, it's an app that you can use to trade cryptocurrencies. It's also a wallet where you can store your crypto. So lots of things are happening with Coinbase. The article I brought is about that they're being sued for having acted unlawfully and fraudulent in their listing of the XRP, which is the currency made by Ripple. So it's begun. Coinbase users are suing in a class action suit. They're suing Coinbase for the fees they get or they spend to buy the currency, and then they're suing them obviously for like the cost of doing the trial. But they're being sued following the SEC, which have launched a suit against Ripple. So Ripple is the company behind XRP, and it's kind of technical but very interesting why they're being sued. And it's basically it boils down to the type of currency it is and whether it's a security or it's a commodity. So what's the difference between that and why is that interesting? So allegations are that the XRP is an unregistered security and it's not a common digital asset, even though it's been around for years. So why does that matter and what makes it different? The thing is, Ripple as a company, first of all, they control the ledger. It's not decentralized like we see with Bitcoin. And also the company benefits directly and is tied directly to the trade of the currency. So because it's not decentralized, it makes it very vulnerable. And it also basically, the way I understand the complaint is it's a way for the company to ensure finances to run the company, which is something that's really different from what people behind the cryptocurrency revolution are trying to do.
Bank monopoly in a digital version.
Exactly. So I think it's a super bad timing for Coinbase. Coinbase has seen a lot of different allegations over the years, many of them rightfully so, but they have just announced that they're, it's time for their IPO. So a class action suit at this time is it's not good timing. But at the same time, Coinbase announced right when the SEC said that they're going after Ripple, they announced that they're going to halt trading on January 19th, and they've limited the trading up until now. So they are taking precautions. But I think, once you prepare for IPO, you just can't afford to have hiccups along the way. And they have seen, they have one of the most terrible customer service I have ever seen. If you change your phone, so for example, my husband also, he started trading before I did, and it was kind of like this fear of missing out that got me into it to start off with. And he's traded about, he has more than double the amount that I have. But he recently changed his phone, and he's just in this like circle loop with them and their customer service with the verification of it being him. So he's been spent days trying to access his wallet. And I actually, one time I wanted to sell some. I had such a hard time trying to get rid of some of my crypto with them. So I think they have to step it up a little bit.
Or users will just change the solution. they're
Exactly,
using.
because it's not like back in the day when I started, crypto trading wasn't for the average Joe. It was really hard. In the beginning, you had to go through a broker. And then, of course, what I like about Coinbase is that they democratized access to trading. So now everybody can do it. But there still are some things that aren't totally user-friendly. But I think, again, with that sort of revolution, they also had to push a lot of the authorities to decide, is this, is it portfolio income? Is it passive income? How is it also regulated and how is it taxed? So when I started out in Denmark, actually, you didn't have to pay tax on crypto, or you probably would have, like they would have gotten you eventually, but the law wasn't yet there. So some of the early movers got to sell their crypto without paying tax. But today in Denmark, you can pay up to a 54% tax on your, on your return on investment.
What?
Yeah, so it's just like any other income. So it's kind of like it's the Wild West that has been put into a formula and an app, and everyone can access it, and it's a great way of making money.
So if you were to get in crypto right now, what would you buy yourself? Obviously, we're not recommending anything to anyone. We're not professionals in
Yes,
this one.
so we are not professionals, which many of my friends know because I've often recommended them to buy at the wrong time. But I actually do see that there still is a window for Bitcoin, because it just went down from 34 to 30,000 again, and it's hovering between 30 and 32. So depending if you're making like a long-term investment or a short-term investment, there's still money to be made on Bitcoin. But I'm looking more towards Ether. I'm still losing money on my Litecoin as the only one. But I think there still is room for all of them. And I think what we're seeing is that a lot of industries are influenced by COVID-19. And I think crypto is one of them, because people are looking for alternative places to place their money and for alternative places to make money. And when the world lacks stability, all those people that believe in conspiracy theories and the breakdown of the financial system, they often look for alternative ways of placing their money. And not everyone wants to place it in property or gold. And then crypto becomes a very interesting alternative. And although this is the year of vaccines, we will see a destabilized world in many ways for a really long time. I mean, most countries haven't started administering the vaccine, and most experts believe, that predominantly people won't see the vaccine in all of this year if we're looking at it from a global perspective. So I think for sure crypto is going to go up, 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 but also bringing us further to the next story, which is also about money, placing money, making money, and finding financial freedom, because the pandemic really has shocked a lot of people at their personal level. A lot of people have lost their businesses. A lot of people have lost their jobs. And people are looking for ways to make passive income. People are looking for a side hustle. People are looking for safer ways to place their money, or just alternative things that they can do with their money. And in Denmark, there's a female-founded startup called Female Invest that have just attracted their first investment from investors. They attracted 10 million Danish kroners, which is about like $1.8 million in a seed round, but just from angel investors. Female Invest to me is interesting because they represent a new wave or a new movement of really looking towards helping women capitalize on their wealth. I think traditionally banks and investors have not looked to women as the people in a household that made financial decisions. But now we're seeing more and more startups, more and more investors that look at women who traditionally now they have longer education than their partners. Some of them are making more money. They're delaying marriage. They're delaying having children, and they're investing in themselves and their careers. And all of a sudden they have disposable income that they want to place somewhere. And Female Invest already has 35,000 women investing with them, and their whole ordeal is they've done it they've done it with like a software as a service model. So for €8 a month, you get a subscription to their investment platform where you get online courses, webinars, and advice on how to place your investment. So they're kind of like an investment mentor designed specifically for women by women, explaining it in terms that women find interesting and understand by strong female role models, which I think we'll see a lot more of in the future. I think private investing for every kind of person, whether you have $20 a month to spare or $20,000, I think it's been this world that's been a little bit gated, a little bit scary. No one really knows where to start. If you turn on the radio, there's always very old, boring men talking about how to place your money. They talk about it in ways like if you want to buy a sports car, you should make these like. No one's really thought about it from a female first perspective, which is why I predict they're going to have an incredible future. And if you're a woman looking to get started with investments in a way where you're not risking a lot of capital to start off with, I would definitely check out Female Invest. They were all Forbes 30 under 30. It's a company that you could grow with. So I would definitely check them out if you're interested in finding some places to place your money.
And not only, probably this will change the way companies operate in total, because women have a totally different point of view than men, and they will invest in different companies, which will just boost these companies, and we can see merging of different industries and companies in total.
Yeah, and how we organize our money and how we organize our work life are topics that are really trending, both last year and this year, because we've upended basically everything we know to be true. How we're working, how we're eating, how we're socializing. I've seen studies that show that actually people are spending more money on quality food than ever before. So because we're often forced to stay more at home, we don't want to just buy a steak. We want to buy a super nice steak. Or we don't just buy a cheese. We buy it from a specialized store.
Yeah.
So the way we are thinking about ourselves or our bodies or our lifestyle, all of that's really changing. And something that's also changing is our relationship with work, our relationship with our employers, what we're expecting of them. And where we've seen a big change is with the tech giant Google. So it was just announced that 400 Google employees have formed a formal union. And they're saying it's the culmination of years of activism. It's been covered a lot of different places. I particularly like the article in the New York Times. So the creation of the union, which is something we rarely see in Silicon Valley, follows years and years of activism and outspokenness within different departments at Google. This is 400 engineers that have formed the union. But the union is called the Alphabet Workers Union. And what they really say is, of course, it's a small union. There are over 260,000 employees at Google. So, why do 400 people matter? Why is it bringing so many headlines? It's because it's the first formalized way to stand together as a group of employees and say there are problems at Google that we have to address.
No way.
Yes. So we've seen 2 years ago, we saw massive walkouts as a response to discrimination and hiring practices. And I think this year, what they're stating is that normally we see unions organize because they want to negotiate pay. But they're not so interested in pay. That's actually not their main area of focus or their main complaint. It's ethics. It's lack of hiring diversity. It's the firing of their prominent AI researcher who spoke out against the biases they've put into their AI algorithms. So it's a response to not just the Me Too and sexual harassment, which it really much was 2 years ago, but it's the broader sense that we will no longer tolerate a place of work that in 2018 deleted "Don't be evil" from their manifesto. That was the famous tagline. We all know Google was "Don't be evil." And I would say that's a pretty low threshold for a company today to just don't be evil. I think, today you'd reverse it and be good.
Yeah.
But they actually deleted the "Don't be evil." And I think for some people, it kind of sent this signal. they're doing so many things that are, maybe they're not evil, but at least they're ethically questionable. And when people internally in the company have said, why aren't we hiring more women? Why aren't we hiring more minorities? Why do we consistently fail to handle sexual harassment in an appropriate way? How come you don't want us to speak out on movements we're seeing in society? That's why they're forming a union. So we have rarely seen unions in Silicon Valley. And I think it's very symbolic that they're forming a union. But we're seeing more and more bigger tech companies have unions that are forming or have warned that unions are coming. So I think that what is surprising and interesting to me is that we've traditionally seen a lot of unions amongst blue-collar workers fighting for basic rights, such as like the right to vacation days, the right to sick leave, the right to appropriate pay. Now we're seeing some white-collar workers with some of the highest pay in the world organizing for issues related to social justice. And I think that if they successfully do that there, we're going to see it more throughout the tech industry.
It's a good change, definitely.
It is. I mean, it's definitely, but the rumor isn't that management is not happy about it. But management is rarely happy when employees organize around them or against them in some capacity.
Definitely.
So let's keep an eye on what unions are forming. We have seen there was this Amazon. There was a warehouse in Amazon, like an Amazon warehouse, where they formed a union last year. Salesforce, now some employees have a union. Pinterest, they're speaking more out on social issues. So we are actually seeing some of these big tech companies.
Look what freedom of speech brought us to. Everyone is complaining now.
Yeah. So, and we actually also, I think there was at Kickstarter, there was a small union that formed as well.
As a Kickstarter?
Not as a Kickstarter, but at Kickstarter. I don't know how you'd form it as a Kickstarter. That'd be an interesting thought experiment. So, no, but I just think like we have so many notions of like how to act and what different industries are like. So, for example, when I first started trading, everyone knows that I'm like a flaming socialist. So they're like, Sarah, you're trading, you're working a lot with money. They thought it to be odd. In Denmark, it's always been like there's this expression called a champagne socialist, where back in the day, so it's like basically like back in the day when I was like in high school and university, people said, you either like champagne or you're a socialist, right? You're either red or you're blue. You can't be both. And then there was this whole wave of women and politicians that came out and said, you know what, I believe, so in Europe, socialism, it's very common. I believe in socialism. But I also want to own a nice purse. I also want to invest my money in a place that generates more money. I also want to live in a nice house, but I'm happy to pay the taxes that you're imposing on me so that I can go to the doctor for free or so that I can study for free. So I think to me, what 2020 taught me is that there are really no black and whites. There's no working from home or working from work. There's no either you're a socialist or you like money. We can be whoever we want. I mean, I think that's what young women in the workplace are saying too. No, you can't rape someone because they're wearing a skirt. That's not how it works. No, you can't sexually harass someone just because they paid attention to you at the Friday bar. There has to be limits, and you can't define who we are. That's really what last year taught me. That women, young people are saying, I want to define who I am. I can be a goddamn engineer at Google and still want to be a part of a union and fight for social justice. Because even though I have rights, I have a responsibility to help other people gain rights as well. So that's what we're seeing, and that's a huge movement. And it's a movement that's very much opposite and different to the movement we're seeing in Japan and also in South Korea, which is the movement called, I don't want to have kids, I don't want to get married, and I don't want to have sex ever, even though I'm 30 years old. So I brought an article from the World Economic Forum about Japan's declining birth rate and how the Japanese government is trying to mitigate it using artificial intelligence. So can AI be the answer to love, marriage, and childbearing? Well, I think the use of AI in dating is not new. But what is it the Japanese government's doing? Well, let's take a look. So the Japanese government is looking to use AI to build advanced AI matchmaking systems as a direct response to the country's failing birth rate. So Japan's birth rate has gone down by 5.8% since 2019, making it the lowest birth rate ever in the existence of Japan.
Wow.
Right. So they want to, or they have allocated money to build more advanced pairing systems that take into account a person's age, hobbies, and values in trying to create a potential match. So like, their idea of a match, like they want them to make babies. Okay. It's not just like find someone, be happy, like make babies. It's the clearly articulated end goal. You need to make babies. So basically, a lot of Asian countries, not to be like very, general in my statements, but matchmaking has been also in Japan a very organized and structural thing in many areas of the country. Not just within like the family unit, which we see in a lot of cultures, that they try to match you with strategic matches that suit the family values. Maybe the families already have a relationship. No, in Japan, several of the districts already have matchmaking services. But what they're seeing is that it hasn't been enough to get the birth rate to go up. So, for example, north of Tokyo, they spent 15 million yen, which is about $154,000, in 2019 to try to create couples. But that investment only resulted in 21 marriages.
Oh.
So that's like not enough to make a difference.
That's an expensive marriage.
Yes, because the decline is actually 200,000 marriages that they've gone down from the year 2000 to 2019. So in 19 years, they lost 200,000 marriages. And there, in many ways, marriage is important because it's kind of a prerequisite for having a child, which it is in many. It's not like that in Denmark. You can just have, tons of babies not getting married. But they're viewing marriage as something that has to happen before they, have a baby. Yeah. And so now there's the national government is basically subsidizing if you create efforts to match people with up to 60% of the cost of building an AI system. So that's been put into the budget for next year. And an official from the government said, we're just dispersing money to fight the falling birth rate, and it's up to the local governments then how to spend it. So, what are they going to implement in order for this to work? But we've seen the use of AI, or at least the claim of the use of AI in lots of different apps. I know OkCupid uses artificial intelligence. They claim to use artificial intelligence to enhance how their community works and for matching, but very unspecified how they do it. We also know that Tinder uses AI, but they're quite vague about how they're using the AI. We do also know that Tinder has imposed some sort of AI-based scoring system. So even though it's not like, I remember when I was in college, there was this website, which was basically like dating. You uploaded your picture and then you got a score from 1 to 10, depending on your looks. And then they matched to what person's in the same category.
Wait, isn't that how Facebook started?
Exactly, right? But it sounds so offensive. But it seems if you dive into what Tinder is doing, that they're actually doing the same. They just have a secret scoring system. But every time you swipe left or right, you're actually assigning the person you're viewing with a score or a positive or a negative. And then depending on their accumulative score, they try to match you in persons with a similar category first in the front of the deck.
And probably it matters if less attractive people are liking you or more attractive people are liking you. This will make you more or less attractive.
Exactly. But I guess they're hiding it a little bit in a way where it's not so apparent that that's what they're doing, because then it seems like much more offensive. But I think it's I think it's quite interesting because in many ways, I think some of our stories are connected. There's a liberation of women. Women are now studying more. They're usually, I won't say smarter, but more well educated than their counterparts. And then there's this, in Japan and South Korea, this total collapse of the dating scene or of the dating structure, in the sense that we're seeing so many people in their 30s who have never had sex. So
Why?
many. It's for a person from Europe, you're just like, what? How is this possible? And I think that when you look at that and the reasons for that, but then combine it with the fact that, like, in South Korea, which is same story as Japan, they are famous for their K-drama,
Yeah.
They do some of the biggest romance series in the world. And they're great at it, winning shit ton of awards. I have to confess, last year alone, I watched Crash Landing on You, It's Okay Not to Be Okay, Startup, all of them strong stories with strong women about love and about finding happiness and finding love. And then it's just so interesting how there's a revolution happening and so many things are changing. In South Korea, we're seeing, while more and more people are not having sex until they're really old, we are also seeing a sexual revolution where people are having sex before marriage, which is something that's new. We're seeing that, some of the reasons why people are rejecting dating also has to do with gender roles. Traditionally, a man has been expected to pay for everything, and dating is so expensive now that many people can't afford to date because a date could cost up to like a fifth of a month's salary. So there has to be some kind of change of what the structure and the dating system and the relationships between men and women have been like. We've also seen in South Korea a surge in stalking and a surge in reporting of domestic violence and of severe stalking.
Wow.
We've seen a huge increase in revenge porn, in the illegal recording of sexual acts and distribution of it. There was a big scandal amongst K-pop stars that had illegally been distributing pornographic materials that were recorded of people without their consent. So I think that there's a lot of things that are happening there that's contributing. So I think that, for example, that the Japanese government creates an app that results in a better match, that's not going to solve the financial problems related to dating or the inequality amongst genders or the erosion of gender roles.
Yeah.
So it's something much larger that's at stake. And I'm not sure AI is going to be able to solve that. But I do commend the government for using technology to try to solve what essentially is a financial problem. In Japan, they have the world's largest aging population. And if they don't solve that, they're not going to be able to pay for the social welfare of their elderly with a declining young population. So it is a problem that they need to solve, and they're taking creative steps in trying to find out how to solve it. Another story on taking creative steps to solve a problem. It's also from the New York Times, and it's about soccer, or as we call it here, football. But at the headline says numbers, knowledge, and better set pieces. A view into soccer's future. So a view into the future of football. It's a story about who is basically the better coach. Is it the guy who uses his gut feeling? He's been training footballers since they were toddlers. Or is it an AI analyst? The story covers FC Midtjylland, which is a Danish team. And I haven't picked them because they're Danish. I'm sure the New York Times haven't either. But it's because they're really pioneering the use of data points in making better football players. So FC Midtjylland's search for a competitive advantage has made it a place where ideas emerge. The problem is pretty soon everyone else are going to have them too. So once they have implemented this, everyone's going to have to do it. I think we have seen analysts, with American football for years. We've always known that was a game of statistics. It's a game of analysts looking at it. But what FC Midtjylland has done that's really interesting is that they said, we need a competitive advantage as a team. We want to play with the major leagues. We want to be a household name. But we're a new football club. We don't have a legacy. We don't have a very established brand. We don't have this pull of some of the big clubs, like Real Madrid or something, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone grows up. If you're a football player, you want to play there. So they're like, how are we gonna build a brand, and how are we gonna create the best football players in the world? And they said, we believe that the answer is data, and having as many possible data points about our players as possible, about how they're feeling, about how they're doing and performing, and about how they are learning. So those are the 3 pillars in their training program. And what they've basically done is they've hired a series of analysts as staff that have began to systematically see how to gather data about them. So the first step was obviously recording how they're playing. We've always done that with any sport, but that's more been for them to rewatch it, not for you to analyze it. How long time does it take for X player to run to a specific location? How many misses do they have? How many hits from which angle? So that was just the first step, basically taking the recording that every person who has ever done sports. I mean, I know this. I was a competitive dancer. And you record everything to analyze your mistakes, but it's not for you to watch your mistakes. It's for them to gather data points on it and find out optimal paths of, least resistance for you. So that was one of the first steps. A second step was also to they're wiring them with smartwatches and everything. So they know how they're sleeping. They know everything about how they're eating, what kind of exercise they're doing, probably when they're having sex with their wives. They know everything about them, and that generates data points. And then they use those data points to optimize their training, optimize their learning, and optimize their eating so that ultimately they become better players.
It almost sounds like cheating.
I don't think it is cheating, because it made me think about, well, obviously there's some ethical things about you're really volunteering a lot of information about yourself, right?
Yeah.
You can't have like a cheat day where you go to McDonald's and have a beer, because like you're going to ping out of all kinds of stuff, right?
Or have a party with friends. Oh, wait, what are you doing? We're in the season.
Yeah, exactly.
Champagne, whiskey? No.
Yes. So I think they're really, but I mean, football is such a talent factory, and it involves a lot of money. So when you really make it to that level, the investment that's made in the player is really significant. So I think that it gives some sort of maybe transparency about what they're doing. But I mean, I would never volunteer to be checked to that, to that extent by what's ultimately just an employer. But I think that they're interested, all of you out there that love sports or have been in some sort of competitive sport, it's not just a race against another team, it's a race against yourself.
Yeah.
You're constantly mentally up here trying to, how do I do better? And you're worrying about your mistakes, and you're practicing and practicing and practicing. So I think that when I was a dancer, I would have loved to have a much more data-driven approach to what I was doing right and what I'm doing wrong and how I can be better. But I think I think all sports is going in this direction, but I think what got me thinking is actually that the team management said that they think the reason that they've been able to do it is also because they don't have a legacy. So they're saying, because we're such a new club, we don't have a way of doing things. We don't have a 50-year history of how to do warm-up, of how to approach fans, of how to approach contracts. They're saying everything we're doing is with a data-driven approach and a growth mindset, they said. And you rarely see, like a trainer in sport saying, we view this as a data-driven growth mindset. I want to say startup, right? So they're really, they just really totally turned it around and said, how can we use data? How can we use new technology to beat all the legacy clubs that are doing things exactly the way they did it because it worked a year ago and a year before and a year before and a year before?
I definitely like the idea. I would love to see how they perform after gathering enough data.
Yeah, because also think like how much goes into, even when it's like the national team, who you pick to play on the national team. How much are you in some ways also under pressure by those high profile players that everybody loves? They have a huge brand, they have a huge media reach, and they have a legacy. But what if data shows that that new, young, smart, cool guy that no one's talking about actually has, a better hit rate, or, like all of a sudden in a matter of a couple of days, he got better? Of course, I mean, they'll notice eventually and they'll put the best player in. But if it's the data driven decision on the day, if you could tell your favorite player had been drinking all night, maybe you wouldn't put him in, right?
I
So-
mean, you can probably tell without AI.
yeah. But they
But
must
yeah, I
be
get-
masters at
yeah,
deceit. But
you have a
it's
point.
it's a totally different way of like flipping everything around. But I will say, like, if you look back at the story about Google and unionizing as well, we live in a world where the relationship between personal life and work life is already quite blurry. So if all of a sudden I, as a private person, have to give my employer a lot of information about what I'm doing when I'm not at work, I think that there's some space for a union right there. I know when we raised our last round of investment, I got quite sick in the final stages of signing. And the VC actually asked me for a medical statement from my doctor that I was no longer sick.
Wow.
And I was quite offended by that. I'm sure that they're probably not
Yeah.
super happy about me talking about it, but I think it's a matter of transparency that we have to have these conversations. And we have to have conversations around whether that's okay or whether it's not okay. And I understand when you make an investment in a startup or in a football player, it is a massive investment, and that money comes from somewhere. Other people have generated that money and chosen to invest that money into a club or into a startup. And there's a responsibility of due diligence with that investment. So I understand both sides of the argument. But I also know, being a person who also did a 23andMe test where all of my gene stuff is out there floating somewhere in the universe, that as tech increases and as we can measure more things about people, we have to ensure that people are doing this on a voluntary basis, and that that data is kept in a secure way, and that it's not used to or misused to make decisions about firing older players because something came up in their data about them all of a sudden being slower and things like that. So it's a slippery slope. So it's both an inspiring case of a club that is a non-legacy club with a short history, managed to turn themselves around and actually become an interesting player, even from a global perspective. But it's also a story of how we will have to regulate the use of data about employees in the future.
Definitely.
How we spend our time at work or at home has been a topic that we talked a lot about today. And I want to end off about a story about the sex industry and sex tech.
Ooh.
Because we've seen with COVID-19 that the sale of sex toys has gone through the roof. Even the other day, I read a short article about a female student in the UK who built a website and now advises and sells sex toys, and it's gone completely nuts with the pandemic. But I want to pay attention to an article on Wired that talks about a podcast they released about Laura DiCarlo and her allegedly game-changing vibrator. It's been a story that's been unfolding for over a year and a half. It started, it started about a year and a half ago. Wired and a ton of other magazines have been covering it. Both tech and mainstream media have been covering it for a while. But it started in the early 2019, actually, at the CES, which is like a big sex tech or tech a gadget. It's a gadget conference in Las Vegas. And so Laura, the female founder of this new game-changing vibrator, she was gonna showcase at the expo, and she actually, before the expo, won an award for her vibrator. But then all of a sudden, they took the award away from her, saying it's because the product was indecent, which is like, so already there, she kind of, she was kind of like a nobody, but she was a woman trying to innovate in the sex tech industry. So already there's like, is there such a thing as like sex and tech, and is it a startup? But she was trying to say, I'm a woman. I want to view sex tech from a more female perspective, which will change the way that it's designed. And she's like, I'm running my company as a startup with iterations on product and, fundraising. And she came out with her first product, and everyone said it looks like an Apple computer, like in the sense that like it was beautiful, elegantly designed. It looked like a luxury product. And she won this award, and then they took the award away from her. And immediately as they took the award away from her, she became almost like an icon, a fighter for women's rights in the sex industry, and a fight where she said the industry tends to favor not just male speakers, but also products targeting men. And products targeting women are usually not displayed, or we're not invited to the same parties and speaking opportunities. And with sort of her call for revolution came a change, a quite structural change, where all of a sudden products or toys for sex were changed from just this like sex category to a health and wellness category, and were allowed to be displayed at these different gadget expos, front and center. So she became almost like a cult figure very fast. And she released this very high-end premium vibrator. It's cost $290.
Wow.
But then the story kind of changes a little bit. And that's why Wired, because they've covered it so many times, have released this like longer podcast with her and some sex history experts. Because first of all, people actually didn't really like the product that much. The first iteration, I think it's called the Osé, if I recall correctly. And some even argued that it hurt to use the product. But then she said, well, I run a startup and it's like a prototype. It's version 1. And then she released version 2, which has gotten much better reviews. But it actually, when you tie it back to tech, there's an interesting story there and a moral dilemma about the ability to do iterations and early releases on products that influence our personal health, well-being, and our bodies. So is it actually okay to release maybe not a fully completed product that you use for such an intimate use that could potentially hurt people? So I really recommend that you go to Wired's website and listen to When Sex Toys Get the Tech Startup Treatment, the Wired podcast, where they really tackle everything from the changes from a more women-led perspective on sex toys to how can we actually do innovation in the sex tech industry. What's okay, what's not, and how do you run that and build it as a startup? So if you're interested in sex toys, if you're interested in running a startup, if you're interested in moral dilemmas of fundraising, releasing prototypes, and fast innovation, I'd check that out. So that's the last story I brought today. Again, to me, 2021 is going to be all about how we make new opportunities for ourselves. So whether it's about how to create more disposable income, start new companies, reconsider our work-life balance, how we want to work, who we want to work for, who we are, and what matters to us. This is the year to make your mark. See you next time.